Hi, this is part 4 of the Making Sense of Statistics in HCI series. Um, in this part, we want to look at the question of what you do at the end. You've got your results, you've done your study, you've done your formal experiment perhaps, and you've got some data, and what happens next? Um, One of the first questions you might ask about this is, why were you doing it in the first place? Um, so why you're doing it sounds like an obvious question you perhaps should have been asking before you did your study or experiment. So you should be asking this then. But also when you start to look at your results, you need to know why you've been doing your work in order to be able to work out what's the right way to analyse them. Um, First of all, you might be a HI researcher in a university, or you might be doing industrial research. There's different phases during that kind of work. These might happen over many, many years of your work. The first thing you often want to know is what are interesting questions to ask. And there is explorative studies which are about trying to find out what is true or what might be true in the world. For this, you're usually after sort of open-ended techniques, perhaps ethnography, lots of in-depth interviews. You're probably less in terms of the statistical techniques. There'll be some, but not as much. The main use you might find for statistics is if you're doing big data explorations, trying to find patterns. Now, just because you see a pattern in big data doesn't mean it's a real one. It might be just happened to be an accident of the way the data fell out. But certainly what you're trying to do is see, are there potential patterns there that you might then look at in other ways. Having then established you've got some idea about what might be true of the world, you then might want to validate your hypotheses. And that's a different kind of techniques. And that's certainly where you'll expect to see a lot of statistical work, but maybe other kinds of deep analytic work, perhaps with qualitative data as well. But certainly this is where quantitative data, formal experiments, large-scale surveys might come in. But that's not the end of the story. Very often, in either of these stages, you see something that looks interesting, but you have that question about why. Why is it the way it is? What's happening to a person, whether it's understanding their cognition or understanding their behaviour. So there's another set of kind of studies you do, which is about explanation, about asking that why and how question. A bit later on we'll talk about mechanism, which is sort of uncovering those whys and hows. But in order to do that, you often have to do some sort of data analysis. That might be qualitative data, but very often is matching qualitative and quantitative data together. Another reason for doing some sort of data analysis is that you're in the middle of software development. You're doing some sort of user testing. And it is normally an iterative process. And there are two kinds of testing. I think you've probably seen these many times before. The first is in the middle of that iterative process. You've done some design, you've implemented it or prototyped it, and then you want to sort of in some way evaluate or test it. And that's a formative stage. It's about saying, what do I do next? Well, how do I make my piece of software or my user interface idea a better one? However, when you get to the end of that process, you then may want to do some sort of sign-off testing. That's a summative evaluation. And your question there is, have I done it well enough? So the formative one is, how do I make it better? Whereas the summative evaluation is, have I done it well enough? And that might be a matter of just satisfying yourself, but also might be satisfying your client, giving them some figures to say, 95% of users can manage this with a certain level of satisfaction in a certain amount of time. So as you can see, you've got different kinds of purposes, both for research and development. However, you might also have already started to think there's some parallels between these two. The exploratory side of research has some similarity to the formative stage of software development. The validation stage of research, very close to the summative ones. It's not so obvious initially what that explanation stage of research corresponds to in development, but we'll look at each of these in turn and actually see that there are some relationships there as well. So first of all, the first of this pair, exploration in research and formative development, in formative evaluation in software development. These are both about finding anything interesting. So from a research point of view, you just want to find some interesting pattern and think, oh, I wonder what's happening there. From a software development point of view, it's more about finding bugs, problems that you would have to fix. It's about finding any though. So long as you're reasonably happy that it's an interesting or prevalent enough issue, then it doesn't actually matter that there's other ones you're missing. You might use statistics, whether those are descriptive ones or more quantitative ones, in order to decide your priorities between things. So if something's likely to be more prevalent, if more of your users had it, found this problem than another one, then you might be more likely to put your effort into the more prevalent problem. But the crucial thing is about finding something to do, whether it's something to do in your research or something to fix in your software development. You've probably all heard in relation to this 5 users enough figure. And it's quite important that the original work of that, which was Jakob Nielsen and Landauer in 1993, was about iterative processes. Note this is 25 years back, and the shall we say, the story of 5 users continues, and there's been a lot of different studies done since then. Some of those are about saturation, they're less about iterative development, but the original work was about iterative processes, formative evaluation, not summative evaluation, and not obviously for doing statistics with. You're going to struggle to do any statistics with 5 users. The reason for this figure of 5 in the iterative process was that Nielsen and Landauer did studies of multiple software development processes and looked at how many users were enough to find sufficiently interesting things, given the costs of a development cycle, in order to actually go on and do the next cycle. So you don't want it to have too little to do if it's very costly to do a development cycle. And the figures they had actually depended on the size and complexity of the project. So how many users you test with during iterative development depends a lot on the situation you're in. If it's going to be a very difficult to redevelop and to redeploy, then you're going to have to put a lot of effort into your evaluation. If it's very easy, and nowadays it often is easy to do small changes, we have lots of agile methods in order to do that, then actually you might need very few people. There's some arguments to actually say n equals 1. One user, if they find something interesting, don't bother with any others, get on, fix it, go on to the next problem. However, again, crucially, whether it's 5 or 1 or 50 users, if you're in formative evaluation, there's always going to be another potential cycle. It's not all the users you test in during your iterative development. It's just one cycle's worth. Summative evaluation, and the sort of corresponding thing to this in research, is validation of checking something is actually true, checking your hypothesis, is quite different. Here you're not about finding something. There's a very particular thing you're interested in. And if there are problems, you want to make sure you've found all of them. So if you're going to sign off your piece of software, you want to make sure that there's nothing there, or at least anything that is there is so infrequent and so happens to so few people, it's not going to be a serious problem. In the research sense, you want to verify your hypothesis is true. It's not like, is there a possible one? You want to know, is this actually true? Is your hypothesis true? Software development, does the system work? Very often too, you want measures here. You want to say, how good is it? How better is my new system than the old system? What percentage of people have some sort of issue and that I've helped? How prevalent are the kinds of issues I'm interested in? So there's, again, similarities between the two. Finally, we go on to that explanation type of evaluation. So we talked about that in a research setting, that you want to, you've noticed something, you noticed some behaviour, and you want to know why is it that people have that behaviour. That's clearly important from a theoretical point of view, unpacking from the what is true to the why it's true. Actually, this is crucially important in software development. If you want to make radical changes, so when you do your test, evaluate, redesign cycles, you can get very often very stuck in doing lots of very small incremental improvements and lose track of the big picture. And it's an understanding of what is happening, why problems are happening, that allows you to suddenly make radical changes that may make whole rafts of issues disappear and create new opportunities.